Kozue's Strange Journey is an esoteric anime RPG dungeon-crawling life sim. Its persona, it really doesn't try to hide that and directly copies anything it can legally get away with. Not that I mind. I'm a big fan of modern persona, so the closer the game sticks to that formula, the better. But all right, let's see if a persona-like made in RPG Maker can actually work. One night, our protagonist Kozue realizes she forgot her notes back at school. She sneaks back into the classroom only to be confronted by a bizarre monster. She runs, but is cornered before she can leave the building. As they begin to close in, she is suddenly rescued by the popular student president, Sayuri. However, Sayuri's powers aren't enough to hold back all of them, so she tells Kozue to run. Kozue is confused by all this, but refuses to leave anyone behind, upon which she awakens to her persona. The game calls it power, but it's basically persona abilities.
Potential?
Now with 2 users, they take a stand against the monsters. The combat works exactly like its inspiration. All combatants have elemental affinities. Hitting a type weakness downs them and provides a 1 more, letting you act again. If you down all enemies, then you can perform an all-out attack, letting your party deal heavy damage. Although I found that the all-out attack got resisted damage semi-often, so I'm not sure if the AOA element is based on your weapon or if almighty resistance is just more common in this game. Even with their combined power, the girls are still no match for the enemy. The monsters take this opportunity to pilfer Kozue and Sayuri's wizard potential. Afterwards, the creatures become exhausted and retreat, letting the duo make their escape from the school. Kozue returns home and mulls over all that just happened. The next day at school, the 2 girls meet on the rooftop. Sayuri explains that the recent disappearance cases around town have been caused by those monsters, called shadows. She is from a long line of shadow exorcists, and this family has ties to the police. So as the current head of the family, the responsibility of dealing with these incidents falls to her. That night, Kozue has a dream of a fellow student being abducted by a shadow at the park. She brings it up to Sayuri the next day, who is skeptical, but ultimately humors her. At the park, Sayuri senses a dimension gate, which are portals to the shadow world. Crossing it, they find a large manor, which acts as the tutorial dungeon. Similar to Persona, your SP does not recover after fights while dungeon crawling, but this game does give you 2 big advantages in that your HP fully heals after every fight, and leveling up does restore SP.
My God Flash strike.
One big con is that the game has no wildcard mechanics, so you can't capture, fuse, or swap personas. To be fair, this is a pretty big ask for a game of this scope, but presenting as a persona-like does create certain expectations. Being the first real dungeon, it's pretty straightforward. There's some light mirror portals for extra loot, but it's nothing too crazy. Reaching the boss room, a student named Miyu is being confronted by her shadow self. Yeah, we're going by P4 rules here. The shadow wants to take over her body, the party intervenes, cue boss fight. However, the 2 girls are ultimately defeated, and thus the shadow descends upon Miyu. Miyu's shadow modifies its physiology in order to pilfer her wizard potential. Once satisfied, the shadow begins the merging process, but Miyu's mental strength is able to subdue it and thus tame the shadow as her persona. With the palace ruler defeated, the group returns to the real world. The next day, all 3 meet on the rooftop, and Miyu eagerly presses to officially join their group. They then try to come up with a name for their team. Seize and Investigation Team are thrown out, but they decide to just split the difference. Due to Kozue's prophetic dreams, she is saddled with responsibility of team leader. You are now given a few days of free time, introducing the life sim portion of the game. There are 2 time slots per day, and there's a variety of activities to do around town. What activities will be available will depend on whether it's a weekday or weekend. There are even social links to rank up, which provide some really useful benefits. While exploring around the town, Kozue wanders into the dangerous slums section. She is hassled by some thugs who initiate a fight. She loses and is promptly brought to their hangout, where they utilize her new role for the rest of the day. They even have her initiate the more green members of their gang. Eventually, Sayuri learns of this and comes to return her home. Around a week later, Kozue feels a bit under the weather, and she takes a test to confirm her suspicions. It seems her defeat at the hands of the thugs had lasting consequences. This is a pretty important mechanic. All your party members are female, so any of them can be put into this condition. Their stat screen will give you a general estimate of how vulnerable to this they are that day, although this condition won't become obviously visible until towards the end of the game and will affect the ending you get. At school the next day, Kozue discovers a secret tryst between her homeroom teacher Sakamoto-sensei and a student named Hina. You can actually spend a time slot talking with Sakamoto, but I'm not sure if it does anything. That night, Kozue catches her younger brother, Takashi, making use of her belongings in his room. She is shocked by this, but is unable to move as mixed emotions begin to flood her. A few days later, Kozue and Miu are invited over to Sayuri's house for a weekend team bonding sleepover. Kozue arrives to find an extravagant family estate and is let in by a crew of security guards. The girls are then introduced to Sayuri's little sister, Sumire, who becomes much more respectful towards Kozue when she learns this girl is the older sister of Takashi, her classmate crush. The girls then close out the day by taking a bath in the family's personal hot springs, playfully teasing each other as they enjoy the water. The next night, Kozue has a dream of a group of delinquents being abducted at the arcade. She tells the others at school, and thus the next operation is a go. Similar to Persona, you have a limited number of days to clear a dungeon. As the leader, Kozue decides what days the group heads inside for a dungeon crawling session. This dungeon is themed as a sci-fi lab. It's mostly just keycards, control consoles, etc. The party eventually comes into contact with a blonde boy who seems to be controlling shadows. He then commands one to take over the captured delinquents and attack the group. The party is no match for this encounter, and so a bunch of lackeys descend upon them for the victory spoils as the boy takes his leave. After the men exhaust themselves, the party is able to escape further into the dungeon, where they come across Hina, who is a close friend of Miu. She seems unsure of how she got here, but prods to join the group. They relent and take her on as a non-combatant. The party make their way to the boss door, and they have Hina wait safely outside before they enter. They confront the blonde boy, who provides the alias of Ace, before engaging in combat. The party is defeated, and Ace uses his powers to hypnotize the girls and creates an illusory world to fulfill his fantasy scenario. Wondering what's taking so long, Hina enters and witnesses what's happening. She uses her powers to easily defeat Ace and free the others from his influence. The party asks when Hina gained her persona, to which she provides a vague answer, which doesn't seem to satisfy Sayuri. They interrogate Ace, only to find that he himself was under someone's influence and has no memory of anything that happened. Now that Hina has shown to be a capable persona user, she officially joins the team. With this palace ruler toppled, the party returns to the real world. A few nights later, as Kozue is returning home, she is ambushed by a secret admirer. She loses the encounter, and the masked boy uses this victory to make his dreams come true. The night after that, Kozue gets a call from Hina, panicking over carrying extra. Since she wasn't involved in any of the previous dungeon defeats, This is almost certainly from her secret school rendezvous. There will occasionally be big exams that the class is forewarned about. If Kozue doesn't take enough time to study, then her grades will reflect that, and she'll have to take makeup tests when all the grades are posted. Around a week later, Kozue gets a call from Sayuri in utter disbelief that she has begun carrying extra. It's almost certain it was one of the lackeys in the most recent dungeon, as she was very popular with them. A few days later, Kozue has a new dream where her friend Yoshino is abducted by shadows near the old mansion. She tells the team the following day at school and thus commences the next operation. In the area near the dungeon, there is a clinic that sells what are this game's version of Persona SP adhesives. And just like in Persona, they're pretty much the best accessory because they just let you go ham with your best skills without worrying about running out of SP. The manor dungeon is kinda similar to the castle, but a lot bigger and more maze-like towards the end. The party finds Yoshino being held by a strangely dressed man who uses his powers to cause the girl's shadow to go wild, leading to a boss fight. The party lose, which allows the man to escape, leaving behind an unconscious Yoshino. The group brings the girl to safety before pressing on. They make their way to the boss room, where the man reveals his name to be Jack and demonstrates his time control abilities. He proves too formidable for the party and uses his time powers to allow his lackeys to utilize the group without too much fuss. Once time resumes for them, Hina uses her abilities to quickly dispatch Jack. Yet again, it seems he was being controlled by someone else, giving the party no new leads. With the palace ruler vanquished, the party returns to the real world. The next day, the art and athletic school clubs are now open. However, Kozue decides not to join any due to her condition. A few nights later, Kozue gets a call from Miu, who is shocked that she has begun carrying extra. This was almost certainly done by one of Jack's minions. The next day at school, Kozue tries to stop some bullying, only to be defeated and given a new special role by the bullies. They will now occasionally fetch Kozue after classes and have her fulfill her new duties. This eats up both time slots for the day, but the chance roll seems to be done as soon as school ends, so if you just reload the day, then there's a good chance Kozue won't be called out, and the time slots will be freed up. A few days later, Kozue has a dream of an old married couple being abducted while hiking in the mountains. She informs the group the next day and commences the operation. But before we enter that dungeon, there is actually an optional one much deeper into the mountains we'll tackle first. The mountains can be accessed at any point in the game, so you can actually enter this gate whenever you want, and it has no time limit like the story ones do, but it does have fairly high-level enemies. Heading inside is a strange forest, where the group is soon hassled by some bandits. As the girls are making their escape, they run into a female knight named Leatrice, who states she is looking for a blonde girl. The party informs her of the pursuers, to which she tells them to leave and allow her to handle it. However, she is ambushed by monsters, which leave her in a weakened state when confronted by the bandits. The bandits savor their victory over such a powerful knight and pilfer her wizard potential. After having their fill, the bandits continue their pursuit of the party, who had fled deeper into the forest. The group eventually comes across a bathing blonde girl named Latina. They inform her of the trouble, to which she urges them to stay out of sight and let her resolve things. Once the bandits catch up, Latina does her best to placate them, allowing the party to escape unharmed. Finally, back at the gate entrance, Sayuri pieces the names of the two girls together to realize that this is in the past, and they are both important historical figures, with Latina being a princess and Leatrice being her personal royal knight. They continue through the dungeon and eventually come across a castle. There they learn that an important visiting princess named Eris was recently kidnapped from here, and so they join the search party to rescue her. Apparently these are all characters from some of the devs' previous games, so this dungeon is some nice fan service for the more loyal gooners. Inside the bandit hideout, the party comes across Leatrice, as well as Latina, who are both in pursuit of the kidnappers. Leatrice tells the princess to go back, to which she protests, as Eris is a close friend of hers. The game offers you a choice of who to side with. You'll always end up with Leatrice in your party at the end, but if you side with Latina and then defeat Leatrice in the following duel, then you can get both of them in your party. However, that's easier said than done, because Leatrice is level 50, while Latina won't be much help initially, as she's just level 1. The duel won't start until you initiate it, so there is a method to help you win if you came into this dungeon before your party is endgame level. Latina has a unique skill that has a low chance to hit, but will do a random amount of almighty damage. However, it's so powerful that it costs more SP than she initially has, so you need to grind her up to a point that she can use it. When entering the fight, clear the debuff that Leatrice afflicts and then buff Latina's accuracy. Then pray that not only the skill hits, but also that you roll high damage. I got lucky, and it hit in almost one-shot territory. Both the princess and her knight join the party, and they all make their way to the kidnapper, who reveals himself to be a powerful demon. The party is defeated, but luckily Eris manages to resist the vessel ritual, and so the demon retreats, his plans foiled, but not before summoning a gate to banish the party. The group awakens in the real world, only to find that their new party members were sent along with them. The next day, Latina transfers into Kozue's class, and Leatrice joins the school's teaching staff. This was made possible due to Sayuri's family influence. All right, with that out of the way, time to tackle the current story dungeon. The mountain dungeon doesn't really have any special gimmicks, other than some breakable walls in its latter half. The dungeons in general have very bare-bones designs. It's mostly just a lot of simple empty rooms with monsters scattered around. The few gimmicks they have really don't do enough to carry them. The party eventually comes across a tall, muscle-bound schoolgirl named Ogami. She got sucked into the gate while training in the mountains. Believing the party is here to challenge her, she initiates a fight. The group prevails, to which a shadow attempts to take control of the defeated girl while she's wounded. Ogami's inner self has a difficult time fending off the shadow in her subconsciousness. Eventually, she does overcome it, and promptly leaves the shadow world. The group continues on, and eventually find the old couple that was kidnapped. They are possessed by the shadow and initiate a boss fight. The party is defeated. The shadow then switches its control to the party, making them take initiative of the old man, while his wife watches on in shock. Satisfied, the shadow retreats, and with the couple recovered, everyone returns to the real world. The next day, I finally get around to starting Sumir's social link and thus gain her as the party navigator. I should have done this way earlier, but didn't know how useful her link benefits were. A few weeks later, summer break finally starts. Kozue has no prophetic dreams at the start of this month, so she's free to enjoy summer vacation however she wishes. The group decides to head to the beach to take a load off from all their dungeon diving. Takashi was also invited, so Sumir uses this as her chance to get closer to him. He is very impressed by his sister's friends, and you can choose which one he takes an especial interest in. The next couple nights, Kozue gets calls from Leatrice and Latina, who each inform her that they've begun carrying extra. It's clear that this is due to their submission at the hands of the bandits. Towards the end of the break, the group attends the town's summer festival. While everyone is enjoying themselves, Sumiya breaks away from the group with Takashi to a secluded spot. She is close to confessing her feelings to him, but chickens out at the last moment. A few days later, the school's fall semester begins. Kozue's hair has gotten a bit longer, so you get a few extra variants to existing hairstyles. The big school trip is coming up, and students are expected to pair into groups. Kozue and Yoshino decide to form a group, with Latina also joining to fill things out. Supposedly you can get a different third group member, but I'm not sure what governs who joins you. During the trip, Kozue's group is eating lunch when Yoshino steps out for a bit, upon which a shadow ambushes the other two. Depending on who the other trip member is, this fight can be pretty tough, and if you lose, then Kozue becomes unconscious and is sent home, ending the trip event prematurely. After the two successfully repel the shadows, Kozue enjoys the rest of the trip and eventually finds herself involved in a late-night game with some other students. A teacher looks in on the room to make sure everyone is asleep, upon which they all quickly hide under the covers. The boy who hid with Kozue uses this opportunity to fulfill a long-held fantasy he's had. A couple days after the trip ends, Kozue has a dream of a group of men being abducted from a hotel. She goes to tell the group about it the next day and commences the operation. Hina has been out sick from school, so she's out of the party for now. The dollhouse is probably the shortest dungeon, no gimmicks and no halfway mini-boss. The group eventually makes their way to the boss room to find Hina in domineering attire. Miu is in disbelief at this betrayal, to which Hina remarks that their whole friendship was nothing but a lie she used to further her own goals. The party defeats Hina, to which the true mastermind erases her memories of him and explains that Hina is not to be blamed for her actions. With the palace ruler beaten, the group recovers Hina and returns to the real world. A few days later, Kozue is hurting for funds, so she decides to look around for some part-time work. On the way across town, she makes an unwanted friend on the train. Upon arriving, she is convinced by another girl to join her in some very lucrative work. Afterwards, Kozue is approached by some gangsters who don't take kindly to her not paying respects. Their boss then decides to make an example of her. A few weeks later, Kozue has a dream wherein the mastermind invites her to a final confrontation, with the gate being on the school rooftop. Before entering the dungeon, I head back to the slums. There's a few gatekeeper fights here, with the main challenge being that you have to beat them with just Kozue. But if you make it past all of them, you come across the slums dealer who sells some of the best items in the game, including firearms and the full H-Gallery unlock. Guns are weapons that have a low hit rate, but deal almighty damage, and scale based on the unique hype stat rather than any of your primary ones. They're pretty expensive, so you'll probably only be able to afford them in the late game. After picking one out, I head into the dungeon. The Celestial Dungeon has a bit of warping around, but it's nothing too crazy. Eventually, the party makes their way to the boss room, where they are confronted by the mastermind, Sakamoto-sensei. The group presses him for a reason behind his actions, only to be hit with the P4 motive. This is a two-phase boss fight, and can be pretty tough if you're underleveled. The party is defeated, upon which Sakamoto puts them completely under his thumb. He begins training them over the remainder of the semester, but still allows them to live their lives. Around a month later, Sakamoto puts their training to the test in a secret get-together for select school staff members. The party faithfully follows his orders, and the event is a huge hit. Over a week later, Kozue's condition has finally progressed to the point that her mother notices it. They have a long chat, and afterwards she is taken to the hospital for a proper checkup. Kozue then takes an extended leave of absence from school to focus on her condition, so no more classes for the remainder of the game. It's not too long before her friends are in the same predicament and must also take time off school. Many weeks later, it's time for graduation ceremonies, but none of the party are able to attend. So instead, they all just have a small personal gathering to help support each other in their impending familial responsibilities. All in all, the game is quite good. Persona-like is one of the more ambitious genres you can strive for, so any attempt should be commended. One of the game's biggest weaknesses is the ancient version of RPG Maker it was built on. It's super clunky and can make playing the game a bit of a hassle. There is a full screen option, but it's kinda jank. You might want to try using lossless scaling instead. This is a pretty long game, so there's a ton of events and characterization that I had to skip over to keep things at a reasonable length. Also, there is a surprising amount of optional hidden systems and content that have specific requirements to trigger. Apparently, there was a lot that I missed, so if you decide to give the game a go, then your playthrough might have some sizable differences. The dev did make a sequel to this game. From what I heard, it improves on a lot, but some feel it is ultimately the lesser experience due to development woes that caused the project to need to be wrapped up prematurely. Check the dev's CN page if you want to keep track of his projects. As always, remember to apply the publisher's patch to the Steam version before playing. Thanks for watching, and if you want the unaltered version of this video, then check the description. And don't forget to like and subscribe.